She planned to ruin me after I do, but the prenup she signed sealed her fate instead. I'm Ethan, 35, and for the past 4 years, I thought I'd found my soulmate in my wife, Claire, 32. We met at a mutual friend's barbecue. Her laugh cutting through the summer air, her hazel eyes locking onto mine like she'd been searching for me her whole life. I was a software engineer with a cushy job, a paid-off house in the suburbs, and dreams of a family. Claire was a freelance graphic designer, creative and charming, the kind of woman who could light up a room. We were married within a year, and I thought I'd hit the jackpot. She'd whisper, "I love you," in the quiet moments, plan spontaneous weekend getaways, and talk about the kids we'd have someday. I believed every word, until I discovered the truth. Claire wasn't building a life with me. She was setting me up to take it all, laughing behind my back with her lover while I played the fool. I didn't crumble. I didn't rage. I smiled, because she had no idea the storm I was about to unleash. It started 6 months ago, a crack in the perfect facade. We'd been married 3 years, and things were good, or so I thought. Claire had been distant lately, blaming it on a big design project. I didn't push. I trusted her. One evening, I was in my home office, debugging code, when her phone buzzed on the desk. She'd left it there after dinner, something she rarely did. The screen lit up with a text from Jess, her best friend, I assumed. He's still clueless? It read, followed by a winking emoji. My gut twisted. I shouldn't have looked, but my fingers moved before my brain caught up. I swiped the screen, unlocked, because she trusted me too, and opened the thread. The messages hit me like a freight train. It wasn't Jess. It was Mark, some guy she'd been meeting in secret. "Ethan's so dense, he'll never suspect a thing," Claire had written. 3 years of this bullshit, and I'm finally getting out. Once I file, half his shit's mine. Mark replied, "You're a genius, babe. String him along a little longer. Make sure the prenup's dead." Claire, "Oh, it's dead. He's too whipped to even bring it up again." There were more, photos of them together, hotel receipts she'd screenshot and laughed about, plans to drain me dry and run off together. She called me her golden goose, her temporary ATM. They mocked me, her words dripping with contempt. He actually thinks I want his boring suburban life. God, I deserve an Oscar. My hands shook as I scrolled, while rising in my throat. 3 years of love, trust, and sacrifice, reduced to a punchline. I could have stormed into the living room, where she was watching TV, and confronted her. I could have thrown her out into the night. But as the shock settled, a cold clarity took over. She thought she'd won. She thought I was the idiot she'd painted me as. She was wrong. I closed the app, set her phone back exactly as it was, and leaned back in my chair. A plan formed, sharp and ruthless. Claire wanted to play me? Fine. I'd play her harder. The next morning, I acted like nothing had changed. "Morning, babe," I said, kissing her cheek as she sipped coffee. She smiled, fake as hell now that I could see it, and mumbled something about her project. I nodded, playing the doting husband, while inside I was already 10 steps ahead. Step 1. I called my lawyer, David, a shark who'd handled my company's contracts. We met at his office that afternoon, and I spilled everything. Her texts, her affair, her scheme. David grinned, a predator sizing up prey. "She thinks there's no prenup?" he asked. I nodded. Good. She's about to learn a hard lesson. See, Claire wasn't entirely wrong. I had been soft about the prenup. Early in our engagement, I'd suggested one, and she'd pouted, teary-eyed, claiming it meant I didn't trust her. Like an idiot, I dropped it, too smitten to push. But after we married, David had quietly convinced me to draft a post-nuptial agreement, just in case. I'd signed it, but never told Claire. She'd have freaked. It sat in a drawer, unfiled, a dormant weapon. Now, it was time to arm it. David and I reworked it into a masterpiece of legal vengeance. If she initiated divorce, she'd get nothing. Not a penny of my assets, not the house, not even her precious designer bags I'd paid for. If infidelity was proven, she'd owe me damages. All joint accounts would revert to me. It was a guillotine, and she'd never see the blade coming. The trick was getting her to sign it. She wasn't stupid. She'd smell a trap if I shoved it in her face. So I baited her, slow and subtle. Over the next week, I dropped hints. During dinner, I sighed. "You know, babe, I've been thinking about our future. Maybe we should have done that postnup thing after all, just to protect us both." Her fork froze mid-air, but she recovered fast. "Oh, honey, we don't need that. We're solid." I shrugged, feigning indifference. "Yeah, you're right. It's not like you'd ever leave me." I let a flicker of insecurity cross my face. Catnip for her ego. She smirked, thinking she had me hooked. A few days later, I staged a fake call with David while she was in earshot. "Yeah, man, I know it's late for a postnup," I said, pacing the kitchen. "But it's just paperwork, right? I'd never enforce it. Claire's not like that." I paused, chuckling. "No, she's cool with it. Said she'd sign if it makes me feel better." I heard her footsteps pause outside the door, and I knew she'd bitten. That night, I brought it up again. "Babe, David sent over a draft. It's super basic, mostly protects you, actually. Like, if I ever screwed up, you'd get a payout." Her eyes narrowed, calculating. "How much?" she asked. "Oh, just a little something, like 50 grand. I lied, keeping it casual. "But only if you want it in there." She hesitated, then flashed that fake smile. "Fine. If it's that important to you, I'll sign. But let's add my clause, okay?" I nodded, hiding my grin. David had already prepped a vague, toothless clause. Legally meaningless, but enough to make her think she'd outsmarted me. The next day, we sat at the dining table, and she signed the postnup, her pen gliding across the page with smug confidence. I signed too, then kissed her hand. "Love you," I said, voice steady. She had no idea she'd just signed her own ruin. With the trap set, I tightened the screws. I opened new accounts, quietly transferring my savings and investments, everything she thought she'd claim. I stopped depositing into our joint account, letting her rack up bills on her own. I encouraged her spending. New shoes, spa days, a weekend trip with Jess. She thought I was spoiling her. I was draining her leverage. Meanwhile, I hired a PI, a guy named Tony, to dig into her affair. Within days, he had photos, Claire and Mark at a motel, her car parked outside his apartment, timestamps matching her late work nights. Tony even got audio, her laughing about how she'd milk Ethan dry before ditching me. Every lie she'd told me was now evidence, locked and loaded. Claire grew bolder, thinking she was untouchable. She stopped hiding her coldness, snapping at me, flirting with Mark on calls she didn't bother to muffle. She'd come home late, reeking of his cologne, daring me to call her out. I didn't. I smiled, bided my time, and waited for her to pull the trigger. It took 2 months. One rainy evening, she sat me down on the couch, her face a mask of fake regret. "Ethan, I think we need to talk," she said, voice trembling just enough to sell it. "I love you, but I'm not happy. Maybe we should separate." I leaned forward, mirroring her somber tone. "You mean a divorce?" She nodded, eyes glistening with crocodile tears. "I think it's best for both of us." I sighed, rubbing my face like I was devastated. "Okay, Claire, if that's what you want, we'll meet with David tomorrow." She couldn't hide the spark of triumph in her eyes. She thought she'd won. She thought she'd walk away with half my life. She was about to crash into reality. The next day, we sat in David's office, her in a sleek black dress, me in jeans, playing the broken husband. David slid the postnup across the table. "Since you're initiating the divorce, Claire, we'll follow this agreement," he said, voice flat. Her smile faltered. "What agreement?" she asked, laughing nervously. "That thing." Ethan said it didn't matter. David didn't flinch. "It's legally binding. Per the terms, if you file, you receive no assets, no support, nothing." He flipped a page. "And given the evidence of infidelity and intent to defraud, you'll owe Ethan a penalty, $100,000 plus legal fees." Her jaw dropped. "What evidence?" she sputtered. I slid a folder across the table, photos, texts, recordings. "You should have been more careful," I said, voice ice cold. She flipped through it, her face whitening with every page. This isn't fair," she shrieked. "You tricked me." David smirked. "You signed it, Mrs. Harper." "Willingly." She turned to me, desperate. "Ethan, please, let's talk about this." I didn't mean it. I leaned back, unflinching. "You meant every word, Claire. You just didn't think I'd fight back." She tried to sue, claiming coercion, but the postnup held like steel. The judge, after hearing Tony's recordings, ruled in my favor, ordering her to pay up. She had nothing left, no money, no allies. Her friends ditched her when the story leaked online, her reputation shredded by viral screenshots of her texts. She lost the house, moved into a dingy studio, and took a cashier job after her design clients dropped her. I saw her once, months later, at a gas station. Hair limp, eyes hollow. "Ethan," she whispered, "I'm sorry." I didn't blink. "You're not sorry. You're broke." I drove off, her figure shrinking in the rear view, a ghost of the woman who'd tried to destroy me. She'd gambled everything, and lost it all to a man she'd underestimated. I was free, and she'd pay the price for the rest of her life.